so self-conscious. You just got to let it go, and you got to make mistakes, and you got to kind of own it and say, you know what, it happens.
Yeah, I find that people don't really notice anyway. Like, you're kind of hyper focused on yourself, whereas like other people, they're not going to notice all the little mistakes you do. Yeah. On that note, welcome to the Weeb Crew Podcast. I'm your host, Mumi, as always. Join with me, my co-host, Psyotic.
Thanks for having me, Mumi.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always good to have you on. And we also have with us a special guest, the Happy Console Gamer. How's it going, Johnny?
It's good. We're doing this out of order, and I think that's absolutely amazing. We're at the end of the podcast doing the intro, but it makes so much sense because we kind of went all over the place, and we just had to start having a conversation and having some fun talking about all this stuff.
The magic of editing. This is a very experimental podcast.
But I didn't want to stop us. I'm like, man, we're on a roll. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, we're 30 minutes in. We haven't done an intro. Maybe we just won't do one for this episode. But
I really think it's so cool. You had my mentor on. You had William Chow on. That I think
right.
It was funny because he was like the one that we wanted to have on like first. Like we were kind of like going through like people's like, oh man, that'd be kind of cool to have him on. But like we reached out to him, but like it wasn't like a feasible seeming kind of thing. And then we reached out to Kenny, and like he came on, and whenever we talk about people, I'll like put them in the time code, where we're talking about them.
And just like at them basically.
I didn't actually know it would ping, like send a notification to them. I was just thinking you're like putting them in the time code, so like it'll pop up if like anyone searches like their channel name or whatever. And I guess it sent him a notification. He watched it, but he didn't like. We had sent him an email probably. At that point, it would have been like a month prior or so.
Yeah, about a month.
So, like, it was kind of weird when he, like, did a response to us, like, oh.
Well, yeah, he made a video about it, about how he was mentioned on this podcast, and I think he was totally taken back by it, and so I saw that video, and I'm like, that's freaking awesome. So I went in and I watched your whole video talking to Kenny, and I was just, I was so happy that younger people were acknowledging William Chow because he was the guru. He was the big man on campus in Vancouver and across Canada and in pretty well North America at the time. And I grew up, like, I saw him found the Japanese Animation Club in Vancouver in like 1988. And just to see what he did for anime and what he did for all of us, I mean, it was remarkable. And I looked up to the guy. I did. I was like, I want to be William Chow when I grow up. I do, because I used to go over his place. And he had laser discs and like box sets, like the kind of, he had adult money and he was spending it so irresponsibly, fantastically on anime. And I was just, I want to grow up and be irresponsible like him because it's awesome. And it was so cool. And so, yeah, glad that you guys could acknowledge him because he's so important in the scene.
Yeah, it was a good episode when we had him on too.
His knowledge of back then, I mean, it's kind of funny. Me and him are a product of the time. We are the 80s, 90s guys, especially in the early 2000s. And then we're kind of like, I'm kind of lost with the amount of anime that there is now. I remember back in the day, I could tell you every single anime that was out. I knew everything. And nowadays, I can say, no, I don't know everything. But there was a time when I pretty much did. At least I knew what the animes were. But now there's so much. Every year, like, there's so much more.
Hundreds and hundreds just come out, and it's, And you can't watch everything, especially, not now.
Well, do you guys, like, here's a question to you. Do you think anime has become more generic over time? Or do you think like me and William are caught in the 80s and 90s and won't let the past go? And that nowadays anime's better? I don't particularly think so. I think anime's good now. I don't think it has the kind of sci-fi stories that it had in the 80s and 90s. But what do you guys think?
If you're wanting like sci-fi specifically, maybe, like there's definitely not like that kind of cyberpunk or like mecha scene that there was in like the 80s or like early 90s. Like you look at like the Gundam that aired here recently, The Witch from Mercury, that didn't make nearly the splash or have as much like attention as it would have, back when Gundam Wing aired or like Victory Gundam. I don't think anime has necessarily gotten, like, I think there's aspects of production that have definitely gotten worse. And then there's definitely, like, as far as like what's being pushed and like marketed, there's definitely kind of a stagnation, I guess you could say. Like there's a lot of similar seeming kind of shows that kind of get pushed in front of people where they kind of have this perception of like, oh, all anime is X or Y these days. But there is like this undercurrent of like anime that's being released that is like way off the wall. Like you had Sunny Boy come out not too long ago, which was like this almost art house project where it's about like kids that like, it's almost like the drifting classroom or something. And it like has like elements of like Lord of the Flies or something like that. And they all have like, it's a psychological kind of show. You get a lot of like experimental shows like that might not have necessarily been greenlit back in the 80s and 90s as TV anime. Obviously, there was a bigger OVA scene,
Right.
which they could have been lit for like 4 episodes or something. But you do have a lot of OVAs that got canceled after like 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah, it was really interesting back then. The OVA scene was like you just get an OVA. Like I remember when they came out with Battle Angel, you kind of just got like I think it was 1 or 2 episodes, and then that was it. They just didn't continue it. It's like why?
And then something like Legend of Galactic Heroes continues on for 110. So it's just like you could. The thing is, yeah, I think the format of an OVA, because you're not restricted to television in terms of length or content, gave people more freedom in some ways, but also, you know, it was more of a risk of how much you could do. Whereas with it's rare for a TV anime, especially one that's like only 12 or 24 episodes, to be canceled partway through. So you have a little bit more security there, but you're a little bit more restricted in terms of like the amount of maybe violence or nudity that you're allowed to get away with showing.
Hey, that's another thing, and that when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, anime was there was so much sex, violence, blood, and guts, and like even in like Megazone, the raw blood and guts and sex was like shocking to me as a child. I was a kid when I saw this stuff. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I thought it was great because I was a kid. But I don't see the same level of gore, at least. Let's narrow it down to gore. I'm not going to talk about sex.
Yeah.
There's always hentai stuff and all that. But there's no level of gore like there used to be. And I used to love that stuff.
Like on the level of like a Genocyber, which is just some of the most horrific stuff I've ever seen.
Yeah, they'd be ripping people's faces off in there and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a show that aired last year that was actually really popular with people called Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It's an adaptation of like Mike Pondsmith's like Cyberpunk world.
Yeah, and it's tied to like the game. And
yeah,
stuff
it was like
that
the
came out.
marketing was tied to the game. It takes direct inspiration from like, you know, the 80s kind of OVAs and stuff where it's just a lot of hyper violence, you know, hypersexuality, kind of stuff like that. So it's not that stuff is completely gone away. And like even before Cyberpunk Edgerunners, you had like a show called Edith and Tachi.
Oh yeah,
which
yeah, a year before that.
That
yeah.
was overly hyper violent or overly sexualized.
Yeah,
to the point.
that one got pretty. Or Ishizoku reviewers before that in terms
Sexuality,
of
yeah.
content,
But
which shocked a lot of people.
Edith Itachi was like shocking and not like the whoa this is sexualized, but in like a disturbing sexualized kind of way.
Yeah.
I think I've seen everything. I've seen it all. I mean, it's it's crazy. I remember when William Chow gave me like Yurotsuki Doji back in, we're talking like 1990, 91, whenever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I remember watching that. I brought it home. I put it in, and I was like, "Oh my God!" I was so scared my parents were gonna come down and see what their son were watching. I'm just like, I was so, and I remember the 90s was also a very different time. I just remember watching, going, "This is so surreal."
I think it was even almost banned in the UK. It might have been banned in the UK just for how graphic it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's something else. I really, to be honest with you, nostalgia-wise, and I swear to God, it's nostalgia-wise, I would like them to release that on Blu-ray now because it is a product of the time. And I think what it was is Japan, no pun intended, exploded at that point. It was like it had to get that out of itself in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It culturally, they said, "Here we go. Here's the most sexually insane, violent thing we could ever produce." There you go.
The 80s were a wild time in terms of what you could get away with in anime for Japan.
Yeah, I mean, even stuff like Iczer 1 to a certain extent. I mean, that has even some of the blood and guts in there is pretty interesting at times. I mean,
you do see a child almost be murdered in that too.
Yeah, by the that's. And do you know what? I bought the art book. I swear to God, it was 1987, and I remember, and I didn't back. This is when you buy art books before you'd even see the anime because you couldn't get the anime.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm that old. It's crazy. William would tell you this too. So I'd go to back in the day. There was one Japanese bookstore in Vancouver called Sophia's Bookstore, Sophia's Books, and me and William would go there. He was older than me, so I didn't hang out with him. My dad would drive me there. I'd walk in, and whatever anime books were on that shelf, You picked it up. It's something you had never seen. You weren't going to see. You'd buy the book. You'd go home and you'd study the book. So I'd buy like Iczer 1 and I'd study the book. And I remember getting to the scene what you're talking about the child almost being killed. Well, the child actually did get killed. He got stepped on at one point later on. But looking at all the blood and guts and the mother turning into this creature on her daughter. And I remember going, I felt so disturbed, but it was so interesting, you know? And and I was piecing together the story.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So just based on the images, trying to figure out what happens?
Yeah, that's what you would do. I mean, it's so weird. Like, I remember getting, this is before William even started the subtitling and doing all his stuff, getting a tape sent from Victoria, the animation club over there, which he ended up opening up over here, that William did. But they'd send me beta tapes. I'd ask for like, Royal Space Force. And I remember getting it in like 1988, putting it on my beta player, watching it with terrible video, and tracking was terrible. And I watched, there was no subtitles, and I watched the entire 2-hour movie and had to figure out what was going on. And you were so enthused back then that that's what you would do. And you would really like it. And then there'd be nobody to talk to about it. I would go to school and go, I saw this amazing thing, Royal Space Force. And people are like, oh, shut up. Like, what are you talking about? Japanese animation? They thought that was weird. And you, like, if you listen to like Japanese music, you were looked at as weird in the, 80s, even into the 90s. I was the only guy in my school who knew what anime was in high school. Could you imagine?
I mean, it's weird to think about it now because it's like so normalized and everywhere in like America and like North America.
Yeah, and do you know, all me and William ever wanted to do, especially him, he did way more for anime than I will ever do. But all we ever wanted, though, was for everybody to experience anime. I wanted my whole high school to know about it. I wanted to preach about Dragon Ball. I saw Dragon Ball Z and nobody even knew what that was back in the 90s. And I just wanted everybody to watch it. I wanted everybody to watch Gundam and stuff like that and to really embrace it like Japan did. And it's kind of weird all these years later, we got exactly what we asked for, but you got to be careful what you wish for. And it's kind of, I'm not being funny. I'm glad it's mainstream now. That's great. But there was a special time when you'd go to a bookstore and buy a book and it was an anime and you're like, oh, what is this? And there's some magic about that. And you fill the rest in with your imagination, trying to understand the story and then finding out bits about it later on and talking to other people about it. This is before the internet. And it was interesting. And me and William have talked about it, that we really missed that time. It was a very special time. And I think we knew at the time that it was. And we didn't realize how quickly it would all change and it would become mainstream. And then everybody would be downloading anime on a daily basis. And they wouldn't need to go and get tapes from an anime store. It's subtitled by William back in the day. So it was a special time.
Yeah, I think that there's like an element of that lost today for sure. I think we talked about that with William too. That back in the day, like we kind of talked about the utility of like anime conventions and stuff. Cause like I remember even in the early 2000s, internet wasn't as ubiquitous with homes as it was like today. So like, I found like stuff like Dragon Ball and Naruto and stuff like that, stuff that was kind of becoming bigger in like Shonen Jump and stuff. And then I found out like anime conventions, and I go to anime convention and you would see like tons of like merchandise and stuff for anime that I've never even heard of. Whereas like today, that doesn't really happen anymore. Like at a convention, it's all stuff that you're going to know. Like, there's not that utility of like finding new things you've never heard of. It's more about like celebrating what you've kind of already know and everyone's kind of already watched.
Right. I mean, maybe for some people there is, but I don't know, maybe this sounds kind of arrogant, but I guess for people who like us who pay maybe closer attention than like your average like anime consumer, there isn't like, I mean, I go to conventions when I can and I try and look for stuff that I've never heard of before. And I don't really come up with that much.
No. There's almost like a kindred spiritness, I guess, to it, where like, it's not like we're doing anything that's like profound or anything, obviously. We're not even like Subtitle group or anything, but we kind of have like that similar kind of mindset of like, not just wanting for people to know what anime is, but we kind of like want to expand like their kind of database and like
their horizons for sure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like we talked about with William too, like there's so much like anime out now. But everybody just kind of like congregates toward like Netflix or Crunchyroll or whatever the streaming service is and like kind of just watches what's kind of told to them is what's most popular. So we kind of are trying to like provide a space, like any kind of space where like you watch something like a Shonen Baku Sozoku or like some show that you haven't heard of before and you can like have a space to talk about it with people. And there are a lot of, kind of communities like that now. Like there's just not this kind of motion as far as like, content creation or anything that kind of provides that space. Like Kenny obviously like talks about stuff like that, but it's more of like an introduction. There's not like a necessarily like a conversation going on where it's like talking about what happened later in the show. Because obviously his video on Shonbaku Sozoku, he only had one episode that he had been able to watch that was available at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But like once you watch the show, I don't know how much utility you would get out of that video. Whereas like, we might not be saying anything that's profound or like revolutionary.
It's interesting because it kind of goes back to William Chow once again, is that back in the day, there was one Japanese animation club in Vancouver, and that was it. It wasn't like nowadays there's so many different clubs and, different ways that people are in groups on Facebook or whatever it may be. But back then there was one group. It didn't matter who you were, where you were from, what age you were, boy, girl, whatever. You were all invited to the Japanese Animation Club if you like Japanese animation. It doesn't matter what shows you like. Doesn't matter what what you're into. Come over and be a part of it. And I used to love it because I remember when William took over the Japanese Animation Club from Victoria. That was it was an island just off Vancouver. There's a group of very hardcore sci-fi fans that opened up an anime club in the 80s, late 80s, and they passed the torch to William. So he opened up the animation club here, and it was just it was so cool going to those initial meetings. Because it was, to be honest with you, because Vancouver's predominantly Chinese, I was like the only white guy.
Wow, okay.
It was predominantly Chinese. And I'd walk in the room, and I'm not joking, everybody turned their head and look at me and go, who's this guy? Because it was weird that the Caucasian people would be into anime. And I was a very strange case. I was just one of those guys that discovered anime in like the 80s with Star Blazers, Yamato, stuff like that. Then I got into Robotech and then Galaxy Express in like 1985, stuff like that. And so I was this real weird novelty thing, but it didn't matter. As soon as I went over and started talking anime, everybody said, oh wait, this guy, he's not just showing up because for some unknown reason, he knows what he's talking about. He's into it. And that's why me and William really hit it off, because we were so hardcore. That we were into like anime stuff that was so on the edge that people didn't know about. And that's the stuff we like, just like you guys. You're interested in the stuff that not everybody knows about. That was us back then too. We were really, there was Macross, which we loved and all that, and all the main shows, but we liked the weird shows off to the side. And when William said, hey, have you seen this show? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, here's a tape on it. And he's like a drug pusher. And I take it and I go home and watch it. And I was like, wow. And he expanded my mind. If he didn't have that store that he had, which he had like thousands of videotapes of everything back then, which was the database of anime at that time. I took stuff home and then I'd give it to friends. I'd tape it off that. And I was spreading the word as well. That's what you did back then. So yeah, the groups have changed. Definitely. Like there's no longer one Japanese animation club for everybody. It's all these different cliquey groups now. And cliquey groups always existed, but I think it's now, with the way the internet works and all that, you can be anywhere, doing anything with a real niche group. If even there's only 3 people in that group, you're there. So yeah, times have changed, and maybe I think probably in a better way. People can communicate a lot easier now.
There's definitely pros and cons. Like you said, you have communities for just about everything now. But at the same time, there's not like that mutual kind of level of like understanding of each other anymore. Because, back in the day, like you had like that kind of barrier of entry where, if somebody was at like a certain point of like anime enjoyment, it was kind of like a camaraderie where it was like, oh, okay, yeah, you're one of us kind of thing. Now it's so kind of readily available that kind of mutual level of understanding is lost. Because like you said, you got people who had just watched My Hero Academia or whatever's popular on Netflix, all the way to people who are watching like obscure VHS rips of some OVA that was lost until about 2 years ago.
Well, so yeah, that's kind of the thing, is that anime has become so big now, so mainstream, and there's so much anime coming out, is that there, it doesn't really make sense to talk about the anime fandom as a like holistic, monolithic thing, where there's like a lot of different sub-communities now that are more interacting just within their own sub-communities than interacting with other ones. It's almost like, it's balkanized effectively, where, it's like there isn't an anime fandom just like there isn't a television fandom or a movie fandom, really, because they're like so broad and so big that you have really just all these different groups who are fans of specific things.
And I gotta say as well, the one thing that I really think is good that has changed is, I mentioned it a little bit, is that if you were into anime and things, and even science fiction movies or video games, back when I was in high school in the 90s, you didn't talk about that stuff because people would jump in to make fun of you because it was cool to make fun of people who were into nerdy things. And there was always those groups of people in high school that were into the nerdy, they were classed as the nerds, which is so ridiculous because they like science fiction movies. And I was always drawn to those people because that's what I like too. And so I had a lot of different groups of friends in high school. I kind of got along with everybody, but I'm glad the stigma of, oh, you're into superhero movies, oh, you're into this, or superhero comics, it was back then. But you're not classed as nerdy anymore because it's so mainstream. You're like, oh, I like The Flash now. It's like, okay, that's fine. Oh, I like Captain America. Okay. Back, if you said that in high school in the 90s, people were like, okay, nerd boy. That's what they would say. And so it was kind of neat being into something that was so underground, but I dare not mention it to the wrong person, or they'd be like thinking you're crazy. And there was something kind of, I know this is going to sound so dumb, but kind of like dangerously fun about it. Like you had this neat, insane thing all to yourself that it was like a treasure trove of great science fiction, fantasy, gore, all of that, like this cool fucking thing. And nobody knew what it was, but if you mentioned it, you'd be made fun of. It was this weird barrier. And I'm glad that that's kind of gone now, that anybody can say, I like anime, and nobody's going to say, oh, that's insane. Nobody says that now. Everybody's like, yeah, get in line. So what?
The last episode, we had our friend Joe on, and he was basically talking about how, if you're not into anime, it's kind of hard to pull on Tinder these days.
Yeah, I bet, right? Jeez. It's
like the exact opposite thing now.
Yeah, I mean, times have really changed. But I'll be honest with you, I still gravitate, and it's probably just my age. I'm the first to admit that. I still gravitate to the 80s and 90s anime, and that's mainly what I collect. When I go and buy Blu-rays now, I'm buying the Blu-ray collections from the 80s and 90s of all those shows that I had on VHS. Then I'm like, oh, now I can get Zillion on a box set Blu-ray. I'll get that, or I can get Dunbine, on a box set. I'll get that. And to be honest with you, some shows of the 80s, and actually quite a lot of them, you'll go back and watch, and they don't hold up incredibly well. But the nostalgia for that time and what that represented is still strong, and all that. Like I went back and watched a bit of Dunbine, and I gotta say, Dunbine has some of the greatest mecha designs ever. I think they're just fantastic. But the show is lunacy, and it's really it's tough to take at times. It shows its age because we've come so far with storytelling, so far. And I think kudos to them in the 80s and the 70s for some of the groundbreaking stuff they did in Japan. I mean, it paved the way. I mean, it's and I loved how they copied a lot of American stuff back then, and like special like Terminator and all that, and incorporated it. Like it's special in
like a Starship Troopers OVA.
Oh, the Starship Troopers OVA is awesome. I watched that on what was it, YouTube a couple of years ago. Generic character designs, but it was very well told. I really liked it. Yeah.
We mean to check it out because in our Discord server we do try to make a concerted effort to go back and watch things that are even slept on by like a lot of people who really like older stuff. Like what were we watching the other day, Mumi?
Oh, Tenamonya Voyagers.
Hard name to pronounce, and we were just like, how the hell is no one talked about this show on YouTube yet? It's fucking phenomenal. It's beautifully animated. What the hell? So we do try to because the idea of are there still hidden gems in the medium of anime at this point
there
is an interesting question. And I think the answer is yes, given that we do still keep finding things that really blows our minds and impresses us.
I do think the pool is getting very shallow though. As much as I've seen, it feels like the things that we find that are hidden gems feel like the exception rather than the rule now. There's still obviously things out there that haven't made it over onto the internet yet. A show called Oishimbo recently just kind of got on, and then the aforementioned Shonen Baku Sozoku. Both of those have just kind of made their way on the internet. So those make me hopeful that there's still a decent amount out there, but I think the pool is definitely kind of like drying up of like as we kind of go back and get more things archived digitally.
Yeah, I honestly want to do another. I don't do anime episodes on the show anymore. I just talk about video games. But there was one I did where I want to talk about old anime that you should watch. Some of the animes that I can't believe that there seem to be lost in time and nobody ever talks about them is obviously it was based in the manga in New Type, but the 5-Star Stories movie OVA, nobody ever talks about that. And that is absolutely fantastic stuff. And even Shiro Masamune's Black Magic M66. That is an anime me and my friends would be watching in 1989, and we just adore. Did you guys ever see that?
Yeah, we actually watched that. Was it last year? I don't remember.
I don't think I must not have been there for that one because I'm like I don't. I've not seen. Maybe wait, have I seen that one yet?
It was the one with like the robot doll running around shooting people.
Yeah, the Terminator robots that have that girl's name programmed in their mind, in their obviously in their robot brains, and they're like Terminators, and they got to take her out.
No, I missed this one. Yeah, I missed this one. I've been meaning to go back to it.
It's a pretty good one. Yeah,
it's a fun one. I mean, yeah, I believe there's a lot of hidden animes out there, especially for people who are not so old. That are your guys' age. That there's so much from the past that's really interesting, and some like OVAs are just like one or two OVAs that were released that are very, very interesting. And then I have them all I have a lot of them on DVD from back in the day that never have gotten Blu-ray.
Never gotten Blu-ray releases. Yeah, it's nice that like you have a company like Discotek nowadays who are like starting to go back and like release. Well, right now they've got an upcoming release of Gunbuster.
Oh, I already had it I already had that pre-ordered months ago. I'm waiting for that to show up whenever it ships. So,
and then I think recently, maybe like a year or so ago, they did Project Echo, and they actually were able to do like a proper like remaster from the original like film negatives, and even had like liner notes or something for it that they included with their release because they found them in this warehouse where they were storing the film.
Yeah, wasn't it Robert Woodhead who found it?
I think so.
Yeah, Anime Ego. He was over. I think he was doing something with Maddox, and he just looked beside him, and his Project Echo was there, like which was lost for years.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I mean, that's I told that story to a few people because it's so amazing. I'm so happy they found it because I know they were trying to do a master off the laser discs, and I was like, yeah, that's cool, but the one thing I'll say about Project Echo. If you guys watched that, I mean, the one thing that really kind of brings a little tear to my eye is that I wish when they were doing the animation cell laying back then and doing the scans, when the movie was first created, they swept up the dust.
Oh, yeah, that's always like a problem, yeah.
Especially on a 4K TV, Project Echo is like one of my favorite anime films of all time. It's up there. And I'm watching it and I'm like, John, just let it go. I'm like, there's so much dust. I'm like, John, let it go. I'm like, oh my God, because I love that film, but it's nothing that Discotek could do anything about it. I mean, the dust was already there.
Yeah, unless you want to go through frame by frame and try and clean it up, which is not really feasible for like a feature-length movie.
But it's funny because the opening starts and it's like pan up in space down to the Earth, and all you see is the stars and dust, and it's like, oh my, that's how good of a job they did scanning that. Probably did a 4K on it.
I think it was a 4K scan, yeah.
Yeah, and all that. But hey, I was very happy to have that movie. I mean, that's I remember back in the day of, going to an anime convention in like 1988, going into a back room, a wooden television. And they're like, oh, we're going to start playing Project Echo in like 10 minutes. And you're like, what's that? And me and my friend sat down and we were just like, you'd never seen anything like that. And I remember the effect that had on me, I still feel to this day, the enthusiasm. It was like, I cannot believe how cool this is. This is like the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. And that's why I like anime. I mean, like at certain times in my life, I saw anime that changed my life. It's going to happen to you guys too. What some animes that changed your life that you saw?
I'd say the top 3 are probably going to be Evangelion, Fully Cooley, and Daicon 4. Which all of those are Gainax. But yeah, like Evangelion's kind of been like that show that's always just kind of been in the peripheral of my life. Like even when I wasn't watching anime actively anymore, like I would still kind of go back and rewatch Evangelion. Similar with Fully Cooley. Fully Cooley was one that like I think resonated with me quite a lot more than Evangelion even when I was younger. And like I can go back and it's almost like a time machine, right? Like you kind of can feel all those kind of feelings you had watching it for the first time when you were like 11, 12 years old, 20 years later. And then Daicon 4, like I didn't watch that obviously 20 years ago, but that's one, like I feel like that's probably similar to like Project Echo for you, where like you just feel like the enthusiasm for like the medium, and it's like almost infectious.
Mhm.
And like you just get so like overwhelmed with like the emotion and pathos behind it that you're just like, man, like
Yeah, especially like Daicon 4. When I saw that in Jesus, probably the late 80s, and I was just like, you could, yeah, exactly what you said, the enthusiasm, the level of detail and attention, and the love and the passion of all medium put into an anime form was like, I mean, you'd never seen anything like that. You'll never see anything like that again. Nobody would let them ever do that again. They just did it because they were fans.
With all the copyright infringement,
Oh, yeah.
they're still struggling to like do like a proper release of that nowadays because of that.
They should just honestly scan it, put it online on YouTube.
Just put it on archive.org where it can be forever.
Yeah, and you know what?
Actually,
set up a PayPal link. I will send money to them hand over fist to get a good version of that.
Well, there was actually a fan group, Kineko Video, were planning on doing a proper like from the film remaster of Daicon 3, and they basically, the project was done. They even had like a raw scan of it uploaded to their YouTube channel. And what happened was Gainax actually stepped in and said, please don't do this. We're actually planning on doing our own release. So, you know, we would really appreciate it if you just like sort of like held on to this. And, you know, of course they, you know, wanted to stay in their good graces, you know, complied. So we still don't have access to a proper remastered version of Daicon 3, but hopefully we will sometime in the hopefully near future.
That would be amazing. I mean, yeah, that spoke to all anime fans, especially in the 80s. It was like you felt like you were part of that secret world. And I'm talking about when you saw it in the late 80s. You're like, oh wow, like look at what they're doing in Japan. They're really into sci-fi and everything, and comics and everything. Like these people are amazing.
You know, people sometimes criticize like anime for being like too insular or just taking inspiration from like anime and manga and nothing else. But you look at something like, you know, like Daicon 3 and 4, and you can tell that, you know, people really are like pulling from like, you know, American superhero comics, sci-fi, all over the place, really.
And to be honest with you, it's so appropriate for the time because anime, even in Japan, was a smaller thing. It was bigger than it was here, but it was like, it was about fandom. It wasn't just about the anime. It was about all of fandom. If you were a fan, which me and William were, we liked Star Trek. We liked Star Wars. We liked anything to do with that style of stuff. And so did the Japanese. And the Japanese were acknowledging that and saying, yeah, we love this stuff too. And then after that, I mean, some of the shows that came out of Japan after Daicon 4 time, I mean, it's just legendary.
Well, it's a similar thing between like the US and Japan, where in both places, anime fandom sort of developed out of like the sci-fi scene, really, where, you know, sci-fi clubs always had like a sort of like subset of like anime fans in it. But you also have that in Japan as well. And like the conventions that Daicon 3 and 4 were playing at as like convention openings were sci-fi conventions. They weren't anime conventions.
Yeah, it's a really different kind of time. I mean, the comic market, wasn't it, like stuff like that? I know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I know it's great to see. And do you know what? It sounds silly for me to say, but I'm so thrilled that you guys know what Daicon 4 is.
Oh yeah, that's like one of my favorite pieces of media like ever.
Yeah, but you guys are younger, so like for me that feels like an old man thing. Like, oh, that's from my time, and because there's no good version of it, it's like, how did you guys watch it? Like, it's like, did you just watch the YouTube version? I guess so, eh?
Yeah, I think that's actually like the best quality version because they did their best to like upscale it into like a higher quality.
Because like I think all we had before that was like a VHS or Laserdisc script.
Laserdisc, yeah.
Yeah, I even bought the records, the vinyl for that song that plays for Daicon 4. It's some American thing. Yeah, what's it called again? Do you remember?
Electric Light Orchestra.
That's right. Yeah, I have that record.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I put that on. I'm like, oh man, the 80s. It's just like you kind of get that feeling and all of that. That's for sure.
Well, and you watch how it's used in Daicon 4, and it just gives you chills. But something Mumi and I were talking about a couple days ago was the fact that we've kind of had like between like William Chow, you, and then like us and the other guests we've had on, we've had like 4 different generations now, spanning 4 generations of people who are like fans of anime, and I think that's like a really interesting thing in terms of just like different experiences growing up and learning about what anime is and getting into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny. I had Will over here probably about a year or two ago. Maybe it was about a year ago. And we were talking, and we were like these two old men sitting down at a table. And I was kind of finally his equal. And the reason why I say that, when I knew William, I was a little kid. And William was an older guy who had money and was doing stuff. And but it was so neat that these two personalities could sit down now. And I said to him, I said, you know what, Will? And I said, when you had the anime store, I said, and all this, I said, I really miss that time. And he turned to me and he goes, you know what? He goes, I really miss that time too. It was we had this moment, and it was kind of like a small emotional moment that we really shared something that is gone, that is never coming back. We only have it in our collective memories. And I'll say this much, and I'll say this much even about video games too. And I'm saying right now is a great time for anime and one of the best times ever for video games. But I would not trade my upbringing for anything. I honestly, I'm not knocking this time, but I wouldn't want to grow up in this time. I'm glad I grew up the beginnings of it all. I got to see the beginning of fandoms. I got to see all of the 80s movies as they came out, like Predator and Terminator. It was the golden era. And I didn't even know it was the golden era. Neither did William. We didn't know. And then anime starting, and then seeing, Dragon Ball on television for the first time, even Sailor Moon, and then, Gundam coming on. I got to see the birth of all of fandom and see it flourish and grow. And I got to see it when it was a very, very special time, and it wasn't so mainstream. But I'm glad that it is mainstream. I want everybody to experience it. I'm not a gatekeeper. That's one thing I never was, I never want to be, and I never have been. But I'm glad I got that upbringing, and I'm glad I got to see things the way I did, and I got to I have memories of coming home, and there's a tape in my post box in front of my house, and I pull it out, I come in, and I watch Totoro in 1988 for the very first time, no subtitles, and go, look at, this is amazing, or get Bubblegum Crisis, the rest of them. And it was like special, really special times. And I was the guy on my street and in my neighborhood and in my high school preaching anime. I would invite people over to my house just to show them anime. And I was making true believers. I started this big group up of people, and I started getting everybody enthused about it. And that's because I loved it, like you guys. I loved it so much that I wanted to convert people. I'm not a religious person.
Yeah. I kind of do like a similar thing when talking about anime, especially like, with people I know in real life who they might already be into anime nowadays, but I do try to like, get them to watch stuff that's like lesser known, stuff that's older, more under the radar than like the more mainstream stuff, stuff that's like really underground. And a lot of the times they end up like appreciating it, and it's always a really nice thing to see.
Yeah, no, it's the amount I can say, like, I remember when my friend Rob, when we first started hanging out again I was 22 and he was like 18, and he was a friend of my, he was a brother of a friend of mine. And I bumped into him in the 90s, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? And he's like, and so we traded numbers because back then it wasn't the internet. So you're like, oh, you like playing video games? We should hang out one time.
Right.
So I gave him my number, and here's the funny thing, and Rob always talks about this too, is that I get a phone call the next day from Rob, and he's like, hey, he's talking to me. And he's like, hey, have you ever heard of a thing called anime? And he said to me that there's this like silence on the phone. It just goes silent. And I'm like, I said, what are you doing right now? And he's like, nothing. I said, get in your bike, because this is the time period. Get in your bike, get over here right now. So he came over, and I had a wall of anime, of videotapes that I got from William Zhao. So we can all thank William Zhao for that. And I gave him all my tapes for Captain Tylor. And I said, here, go home, watch this, and then call me when you're done. And then a couple of days later, he calls me. He's like, oh my God. And then so he came over, and I just started indoctrinating him into anime and like everything, and even video games. He wasn't even into Street Fighter back then. I got him really into Street Fighter.
I had a similar experience like that in high school, where in like study hall or something, I was sitting just on my laptop, on my like school laptop, and I was watching Evangelion on some piracy site. And my friend was sitting next to me. He's like, hey, what are you watching? I'm like, oh, I'm just watching this show called Evangelion. It's about like giant robots and shit. It's supposed to be really good. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, I'll watch it with you. So we watch it. We go home for the day. I see him like the next day, and he watched the entire goddamn thing, and he's like, dude, that was an experience. I'm like, oh, really? I haven't finished it yet.
Yeah, like nobody can say that how big Evangelion was when it came out.
Oh yeah, it's hard to overstate that.
It is. I mean, hey, I got my tape from William Chow. I brought it home. I think he only had the first 3 episodes or something. And I remember watching that first episode. I must have watched that first episode like 10 times when I first brought it home. I could not believe how fascinating it was. Like talking about, like where they're fighting God and God's using angels to attack. I mean, these were so fascinating. And that's what the Japanese were just firing on all cylinders. I mean, the imagination and the level of things were so cool. I mean, and as you go with that show, as you guys know, it gets so much more insane.
It flies off the rails by the end.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is like it's pretty well documented. Like even when it came over to the US, like around 2003, 2004, like that kind of coincided with like the big disaster at the time, Hurricane Katrina. So like people had like that kind of imagery in their mind of like flooded cities and stuff like that. And then Evangelion comes along. And so like you had like this connection even on like that level, even though it's a Japanese production, like it was still kind of reflecting life for like a Western kind of perspective, even 5-10 years later.
Yeah, no, somebody can watch that show now and it's still equally as good. It hasn't aged. I mean, I remember though, a lot of people talk about the ending, how they were so mad about it. I watched it and I'm like, this is weird. It's just fitting. That's what I said back then. I'm like, yeah it is what it is. It is what it is. And I remember that last episode, they're all clapping and I'm like, what the fuck? What, this is the ending? Like, to be honest with you, so much of that show is so all over the place anyways, that you just kind of have to accept it because it's so lunacy when you get to the end anyways. So
it's interesting because like I never felt that when I watched the ending. Like I always was like, it might just because I was so young. I was just like, oh, that was good. And like there was never like a moment of like, what?
Just implicitly accepting what you're seeing on screen.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I watched the ending and I was just like, okay, that's the ending. And I wasn't mad about it or anything like that. It wasn't until the internet and it was like years later after I'd seen it, that people are like talking about it and, oh, that ending. And I was like, yeah, that ending was pretty silly. Then I kind of jumped on at that point when there was somebody to talk to about it. But I wasn't angry at the ending. I just was like, that's the end of the show. That's it. That's all.
I think it's really interesting what they did with it, especially visually, and I kind of wish I saw that more in a lot of anime.
Yeah, and didn't they went back and reanimated it? Didn't they change the ending? They changed the ending so many bloody times.
They reanimated some stuff for like a home media release, and then they made the end of Evangelion, which was supposed to be like the true ending or something along those lines.
Yeah, I gotta admit, guys, like after that, I kind of got lost in what the hell was going on with Evangelion.
Oh yeah, and then the rebuilds, which are sequels but also remake. It gets really confusing.
Yeah, it got really confusing, and I was just like, you know what? I like the original show, and I kind of liked a bit of the movie. I'm out, and I've tried to watch some of the. I don't even know. Like, is it on Prime? Did I watch it?
I think the new movies are on Prime.
Yeah, I started to watch it, and I was like, it's interesting, and I like all the technology and all the weird stuff, and I think that's cool, but. It's so weird how it's like it's all 3D now, but they do a good job masking it. It looks really nice, but I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. I'm just kind of like, I'm out. I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, the rebuilds are like interesting to me from like a meta perspective. Evangelion's like my favorite anime of all time. So like I got really into like reading into the creators and interviews and stuff like that. So for me, I see the rebuilds as Ono, the director, kind of rejecting what he made back in the 90s and like rejecting that facet of himself that he sees in the show and kind of trying to reclaim it as his own like image now and kind of addressing the criticisms that he might have or like others have had for the show.
Right. But you can't please everybody. I mean, it's like George Lucas going back and changing the original Star Wars movies. I mean, sometimes you just have to let it be. And all that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, if he has something to say, then I get it. But it's that I just is like I don't know what's going on anymore. Pretty much, I have no idea what's going on anymore. I'm out.
It's definitely interesting, but it is very complicated.
It makes for an interesting conversation when trying to piece it all together.
Yeah, for me nowadays, it's just about going and collecting all the old anime. And Discotek is just the best for that right now. I mean, there's so like to get Gunbuster. You guys have seen Gunbuster, right?
Oh,
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I won't spoil it for anybody listening, but that ending, god damn it, that ending of Gunbuster. When I saw that, I mean, just so incredible. Like, I mean, so the science fiction storytelling of Gynex and stuff like that back in the day was just outrageous, right? With what they were doing. I don't know. I mean, that when they got to Earth at the end, I'm like, wow. Like that. Yeah, I'm not gonna say any more to ruin it, but
yeah, it's a very profound kind of like moment and shot. Really, like it's a very iconic scene that I think's been kind of referenced a few times in shows.
I gotta ask you guys a question because you're the younger generation. How are you finding these? How are you finding Gunbuster and Iczer 1 and Dangai-O and how are you finding that? I mean, because like I just want to say, there's no guide out there. There's so much. There's so much to look at online. Like, how do you guys negotiate all that and say, oh, there's some anime that I think I'll watch from the past? Like, take a gamble on? It's so weird.
There's some levels to it. Like,
it's a mix.
Yeah.
So we'll hear about stuff through just the grapevine, other people talking about it who've seen it. But also, I actually you just wrote up a little program that will pull just a random anime based on like some sort of specs I've given, like how long it is or when it came out or how many people have seen it, to just like give us like something random to watch, and we'll just go with that.
There is like levels though where like Gunbuster is pretty highly regarded. Like once you kind of get out of like that initial kind of maybe 1 or 2 levels of like, entry level being in the anime, once you kind of start expanding your horizons, there are communities that kind of make charts and stuff like Gunbuster, Evangelion. The more big name kind of shows are kind of spread around. Stuff like Iczer 1 though, you kind of have to dig quite a bit deeper. I guess if you get into like a mecha community, they probably talk about quite a bit more, but like if you're just watching anime from all facets, like we kind of try to surpass our own biases by just doing like randomizers. So like, when I kind of like will pick something at random to watch, it might be something that's kind of in line with what I would usually watch anyway. So the good thing about doing like a randomizer or something through these databases is it's kind of circumventing that, and it's just like, oh, here you go, you're watching this now.
It's so funny. You're the next generation that's going to get older and to teach the younger generation to you that's going to come up. So I'm really happy that I feel like we're in good hands with you guys, and you two represent a lot of other people out there as well. So I'm really happy that you're not forgetting the past and not being blinded by the past. Even I am not blinded by the past. But there's there is a lot of good stuff in the past that has come out, and I'm happy that you guys are preaching that, because one day you're gonna be me. You're gonna be 49 years old and go, oh my God, it's a long time since the original Macross came out, and Robotech. I mean, I remember watching Robotech, on television. Just walking in, picking up the TV guide in '85, going, oh, I wonder what's on TV today. And then checking out Saturday with all the Saturday morning cartoons. I'm like, oh my God, Robotech starting at 11 o'clock in the morning? And I'd read a little something about it in a magazine ad. And I put it on, I taped it on beta. I actually have the very first episode memorized of the Macross saga, Robotech, Booby Trap's the name of the episode. And I watched that episode so many times. I was so moved by the episode that I went and grabbed my father from upstairs. I must have been about 11 years old. I'm like, Dad, you got to come watch this. And he's like, my dad is an old school guy. I mean, he was a good guy. He took me to every 80s movie there was, all of them, every single one, all the greats. Sure. But getting him, I sat him down. I said, Dad, you got to watch this. Because I thought Macross, the first episode, was like, so the sci-fi there, all of that. I was seeing a lot more where my dad just saw a cartoon and he tuned out and he watched it. He's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But he didn't give a fuck. He couldn't care less, and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny being that young guy then, and I'm 49 years old now, talking about that moment. I wonder what times are going to be like when you're older. Yeah, when you're my age, I'll probably be dead. But you guys I wonder how the anime scene will be then, because if you think there's a lot of anime now, give it another 20 plus years.
Oh yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting in however many decades to like look back and like even look at like really popular anime now. Like think about like, oh man, I remember My Hero Academia. I remember Jujutsu Kaisen, Demon Slayer. I remember when that was like the big thing everyone was talking about.
I get that a little bit now even. Stuff like Naruto and stuff. Like,
oh, yeah.
It's been almost 10 years since that show ended. And that was such a big pivotal part of like anime early on.
Yeah, but Naruto still feels like it hasn't left yet. You know what I mean? It has that feeling. It hasn't left yet, even though it's been that long. Naruto still seems fresh still.
Part of that is because like they made the sequel. So it is kind of still kind of being shuffled around. Same with like Bleach too. Bleach just had a new season that aired.
My God. Recently. How many episodes are they at with that show?
It got canceled at like 300 episodes? I'm not really sure. I'm not a huge Bleach fan. It got canceled and then it just got renewed like last season, I think it was. But yeah, you kind of are seeing that a little bit with like early 2000 shows right now. Like there's this joke that kind of goes around. I don't know if you know the show Azumanga Daioh.
Is there an English? Like I usually need to know the English titles.
I think that is the English.
Is that the English? Then like, I don't know it. No, I don't know it. Don't know it.
It came out in like 2002. There was like this kind of joke image that kind of got floated around 2012 that was like Azumanga Daioh is a decade-old show. That image is now a decade-old image. So.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes what I'll do is I like to go through just like, because the internet in a lot of ways just acts like an archive of stuff, for better or worse. So what I like to do is I like to go to like old like Usenet threads because Google had like archived all of them basically, and I like to look at like, well, back in like 1995, back in like before the internet was really even much of a thing, what were people saying about Evangelion? What were people saying about Sailor Moon when it came out? And something interesting I learned is that the conversations a lot of people have now about anime, like subs versus dubs, or there's too much, anime nowadays isn't as good as anime back then, is those conversations were also happening in the 90s, which is a really funny thing to think about. People complaining about like Sailor Moon and all this, magical girl shit taking over the genre. And you look at that now and it's like, wow.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of magical girl shows back then. I remember that. Like everything, Magic Knight, Ray Earth, Sailor Moon, everything that was coming out seemed to be following that trend. I think people were annoyed about that, saying, can we get back to the sci-fi, the hardcore sci-fi stuff? Or the shows that used to drive me crazy. I got so sick of them. And I'll just be, you can use this for almost every show back then. There's a young guy who's surrounded by beautiful women, but he's not really interested in them or whatever. And he'd always get a nosebleed. I got so sick and tired of seeing that genre. I got so tired of it that I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. And I was just like, I would avoid shows like that, like the plague. They were a novelty when they first came out, but every single show started to do, there was so many of that kind of thing. The young guy who's surrounded by the beautiful women, and he was oblivious to it all. And it's just like, oh no, I can't watch this.
There's always been, like, people always will, like, point out today, like, I'll call it isekai anime. They're always like, oh, there's so much of this, like, isekai anime, it's ruining anime. I mean, if you go back, like, every era of anime has had, like, a genre that kind of they honed in on as creators and oversaturated the market a little bit. Like you said, the harem anime of like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, and even in the 80s, I love mecha more than anybody. But bloody hell, in Japan, every show was mecha. And I wasn't complaining. I liked it, but there was a lot. I mean, do you know what? I have a video that I remember I ripped it off YouTube probably around 8 years ago. It's no longer out there. And it's every single like anime mecha opening of the 80s. And I sat in my in bed one night. This is probably like 6 months ago. And I sat and watched. It's like an hour long. And I'm like, I didn't know that show. I didn't know that. And as much as I think I know a lot about anime, there's so much that you can't know. And it's like the amount of mecha shows that came out in the 80s. I'm like sitting there and my wife's reading. I'm like, I've never fucking seen that show before. I don't even know what this is. Like, and that's weird to me. And so, yeah, for all of us, I think we can't know it all, but it's kind of funny how they do milk a genre for sure. And like, I had no idea there'll be an hour's worth of 80s openings for mecha anime alone. Like, that's crazy.
I'm surprised there's just an hour's worth, to be honest. There's probably.
Well, when you think about it, most of them are like 30 seconds to a minute long. Like they're kind of in that zone. Sing a little song there. The one thing that I do miss, I'll say about the 80s, the 70s and 80s is the men singing opening to like Yamato and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
I miss that time period. That's so cool. I
remember reading something somewhere where in Japan otaku were in the 80s were upset because anime openings, anime theme songs would no longer say the name of the anime in the opening. They were like, what the fuck? This isn't like Zambot 3. This isn't like Ideon.
Yeah, because the guy was saying Macross. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always had to say the name. It was pretty wild and all of that. But yeah, I miss male singers. I think they still have them, but they're younger. Back then they had old men singing.
Yeah.
And it was wild.
Kind of almost like crooning these songs.
Yeah, do you know I bought the vinyl for Dangayo probably around a month or so ago because I heard that the main singer had passed away who sang Crossfight. And I've always loved that song. And so I bought the vinyl. I had to spend a pretty penny on it, but I'm like, I got to have Crossfight because I really, really love that song and all that. But yeah, I miss the more male singers from the 80s. The old men. We need to bring them back.
They actually had, I don't know if you've seen the remake of Battleship Yamato, like the OVA they had back like in 2012.
Oh, I remember it, but I didn't see it. I knew of it though.
I think on that one, they actually brought in the son of the original singer because he was also a singer and he did the opening for the OVA.
That's incredible. That's so cool. Yeah, I like stuff like that. That sounds amazing. Did you know, I would really wish they would bring some of the old Yamato movies over. I think there's like legal stuff. There's so many problems with Star Blazers and Yamato. And I mean, I'd really like to see some of the old movies like Be Forever Yamato, stuff like that brought over. I'd like to see some real high def. I know they get it in Japan, but we don't have it here.
Yeah. Like or even like Macross, even, which is like, tied up with like Harmony Gold and Robotech and stuff.
Don't even get me started. I'm so angry. That's a whole other podcast into itself. I
think they have whole podcasts for that.
At least like the rest of the franchise. Like I managed to see they brought Macross Plus over and played it in theaters, and I caught that. That was pretty awesome to see.
You're so lucky to see that. We were up in Canada. We never got anything like that.
It was weird to watch it in a theater because it's 4x3. I wasn't used to that.
Well, hey, I got a great memory with Mr. William Chow. I'm going to plug him again. He rented out a theater at a college, and
oh wow,
yeah, and he because I think Macross Plus OVA 4 had just come out. I know this is like 1994ish, somewhere in there, and so I remember going with my girlfriend at the time. I'm watching the final part, and I had shivers watching it in that theater. Especially when the Macross launches at the end. I remember going on the singing with Shan Apple. I'm like, oh my god, this is peak living, and it was really something else. I mean, yeah. So you're lucky to see Macross Plus in the theater. I would have really liked to have seen that recently.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I remember in a video you kind of were talking about how like Macross was like a watershed kind of moment for you when you watched like the scene of like the Earth just getting decimated.
Oh yeah,
like,
yes, yeah. That was wild.
It's funny because in a way, like Macross is kind of a similar moment for me, not necessarily in the same way, but it was kind of like the way I kind of dipped my toes into like older anime. Before I watched Macross, like I watched like 90s stuff and like late 80s stuff, but as far as like getting back into like the 70s, I had a little bit harder time. Macross was like kind of my gateway into like, okay, I'll dip my toes into Macross, and like that ended up sparking my interest enough that I was able to like go into like the original Gundam and Galaxy Express TV series and Harlock and stuff like that.
Oh, that's awesome. It's a neat time period. I mean, for me, like Macross, the original TV show is gold. And then the movie is just incredible. And then when they did Macross 2, not so much. That's that's not good. I don't hate it. I'm not a hater, but I don't like it particularly. I love Macross Flashback 2012, and then Macross goes through a really weird time. We got Macross Plus that is so good that it's like I still can't believe how good it is. And then we had Macross 7 out at the same time, which was I know I've done some Macross podcasts and I've argued with the people on it in a nice way, but I cannot stand Macross 7. I even went back and tried to watch it again. I have the Blu-rays of it, and I, the kind of counterfeit Blu-rays with subtitles, couldn't do it. And then I just, Macross 0 is okay. It's fine. It's not great though. But oh my god, Macross Delta is something that absolutely offends every single fiber in my entire body. And
I was about to ask about Macross Delta.
Dude, am I the only person? I feel like I'm the only sane person that hey, and let me tell you, on Twitter, I follow a lot of guys that live in Japan that are really into Macross, and they really like Delta and all this. I just don't get it. And the reason why is we come from Macross, the original show, which is a kind of a serious show. I know, as serious as it can be with its stuff. But then we go to Macross the movie, which has got some blood, it's got some intensity, epicness. And then all of a sudden we jump. If you told me that in the future there would be like Sailor Moon type of characters, idol singers, controlling Valkyries, by singing and all of this, I watched the first episode of Macross Delta. I tried to watch it like 3 times, and I'm like, I'm out. I can't do this. I can't. This is not. And do you know what bugs me is the artist. What's his name? Shoji Karamori. Yeah. Yeah. Like, what is this guy thinking? Like, he thinks like he's bringing it back to like some weird level that I feel he doesn't understand what Macross is.
Kawamori was more of like a creative mind. Like, obviously he was the one that like wrote the original Macross and like the world and stuff, but he wasn't like the director. Whereas for later stuff with like 7, that's when he kind of took more of a prominent role in like the directorial role.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that you were talking about, like the original Macross was directed by the guy who directed the original Yamato and Legend of Galactic Heroes. And then the guy who directed Macross Plus was the guy who directed like Cowboy Bebop and those kind of shows. And then when he kind of took over for like Macross 7, Frontier, and Delta, I've kind of talked about this with Sai. He hasn't actually seen anything other than Plus.
I've only seen Plus.
That's good enough. Stay there.
So I was kind of explaining to him, like, Macross 7 is kind of where they introduce all like the weird alien stuff in the Macross franchise. Like, you kind of start going into like alien worlds, and like Basara like eats a fucking leaf at one point.
Yeah, that's literally him eating the leaf is the only thing I've seen of the show. I'm like, what?
It is an edible leaf, but
oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. But no, like you get some weird. That's kind of. I like Frontier.
Oh yeah,
I
I forgot to mention Frontier. Frontier was acceptably fun. I didn't love it, but I don't hate it at all.
I do have like a soft spot for Delta. I don't think it's a good show, but I associate Delta with like my first trip to Japan, because that was what was airing when I went there, and so that was kind of what was.
So there's a romanticized like trip to Japan, and you're seeing this anime, and you're just accepting.
Yeah,
do you know what?
Like,
I totally get it. I'm not a. I totally understand that. I get it for sure.
Like that. I just think like I have a soft spot for it. I don't like the show. I like the music in the show. I like the story with like the artists and stuff like that. The main girl who sings like the very bassy like lead singer, she was actually like 16 or 17 at the time. Like, she was really young, and like she got into the industry that way. Like, I like the music for it, but outside of that, like I kind of liked the idea. Like, it kind of hinted at like, the pilot was going to be like a dancer or something. And then like, maybe he was going to like, it was going to be like I don't know if you know the game, like 50 Cent Blood on the Sand or whatever, like whatever that game is where they like, you kind of have to like fight in rhythm to the music. Like, I thought it was going to be like a Dance Like You Want to Win Evangelion episode kind of situation where they had to like sync up.
Oh yeah, I remember that. But that was a good episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I thought it was going to be that throughout. And then it kind of wasn't. I'm like, oh.
I don't know. You put Sailor Moon characters, like, no, hey, there was always the idol singers. There's always been Sharon Apple. There's always been Lin Minmay. But they were, well, Lin Minmay at least was a kind of a real person. Like, that there was a role that she played. She was the one singer. Where this is just, it's almost kind of, to be honest, I feel it's making fun of Macross. And the seriousness that was created in the original show was perfected in the movie. The movie, if you watch the movie, Macross the movie, which is my favorite anime of all time, my favorite anime film of all time.
Love, yeah.
I mean, takes itself so seriously, and the technology and the, with the Maltrati, the conflict there, and there's so much going on there. And then it's just like, no, we're just gonna go totally stupid. Like, that's how it feels for me. That's like almost like taking your favorite show, Evangelion, and then just doing a Sailor Moon thing with Evangelions. It would make you
Why
angry.
do you say
too.
that? They have like school spin-offs of Evangelion, so they got all
stuff
kinds
like
of weird stuff for
the
that.
one manga.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, sorry. I've gotten into like, I don't argue online, but anybody that like tries to poke the bear with me about Delta on Twitter, I'll lose my shit. I get genuinely angry. It's like, no, it's the only time I'll say, no, you don't know what Macross was. It's like it was really a cool sci-fi series show, and they're just making it silly.
I think in a way, it kind of shows Kawamori's adaptability, I guess. That kind of was what made the original Macross and like Plus, even though they're so vastly different, like stand up so well, because he was so willing to like, because like Minmay is very reflective of like idols at the time of like when she aired.
Right.
And then Sharon Apple, like she's very kind of forward facing, where it kind of predicted like the whole Vocaloid trend and like almost like VTubers, stuff like that.
Yeah, virtual idols, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting how it kind of was prescient in that regard.
I think he kind of, like his weirdness kind of was able to let him do that kind of thing, but he had, you know, Watanabe and Ishiguro to like kind of rein him in a bit and like act as the director for the show. And he kind of took the director role himself. You got Delta.
You get Delta. I mean, like in Macross the movie, like the Meltrati are standing on the heads of Zentratis. I'm squishing their heads in their mech suits, and I'm just like, this is where it's at. I like this because it's, and even when Max Sterling's in his Valkyrie and he actually opens up a battle pod, pulls the Zentrati out and shoots him in the face. And it explodes in space, and I'm like, that's my Macross. You know, like, it's like, what happens? And I'm really...
Do you remember Love did get very violent, like to the point where I think they actually censored the home video release for like years. And like we just now got it recently.
Oh,
like, version.
I spent like $150 on the box set, and I couldn't believe it was censored when I got it back in the day. I was so mad.
Wow.
I'm still mad about it. And even I have some counterfeits that I had to get off eBay. They're fucking censored too. So I don't know where, you guys got to give me a link because I need to go and buy the original uncensored. You know, it's so ridiculous.
It's like how Mumi and I got the like really expensive box sets for a G-Kid's Evangelion release.
Oh yeah, the Ultimate Edition.
It still doesn't have Fly Me to the Moon for the EDs.
And that's why I didn't buy the box set, because I found that out. And I'm like, can't we figure this out? Do you know what? That even bothers me with, is it Double Zeta Gundam or no, I think it's Zeta Gundam. How when they released the box set over here, they had to change the opening song because of some copyright. Yeah, because of some copyright, and it just absolutely pisses me off. The original, it's Zeta Gundam. I swear it's Zeta Gundam, but there was some copyright thing or something, so they just put generic music in the beginning.
Part of me wonders because have you seen Ideon?
Yeah, like the old show. You mean like from like. That's the older show, right? 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, really early 80s.
I haven't seen it all, but I know of the show. I know what it is, kind of.
Well, so part of me what's always wondered is I don't think that's ever been brought over, and I think I wonder if it's because the movie uses the song "Happy Birthday," which is obviously, at least at the time, would have been like heavily copyrighted. So I always wondered how the hell did they get away with that? They probably just didn't give a shit and just did it.
Am I wrong? I'm not sitting in front of the internet right now. I'm just talking in front of my phone. Wasn't there a release of Ideon? Wasn't there a Blu-ray like standard definition? This is off the top of my head. I'm probably wrong, but was there a box set or something? Maybe not.
Oh no, it's I'm looking at it right now. Space Runaway Ideon complete collection Blu-ray. Released in 2019, according to Blu-ray.com.
Okay, my brain's not completely melting then. But hey, I wonder if that song's there. But probably is, yeah.
But yeah, we're not really big Ideon fans here.
No, but that's a different topic for a different day.
You piss off those people later.
I don't know the details of it. It's just like one of those older shows. It's like, I don't have the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly long, too, and it's pretty slow. It's 39 episodes, and it could be like half that.
I thought it was fine.
I'm much more negative on it than Mumi, which is, I don't want to say rare, but at least for something like this, probably uncommon.
I know. I mean, as I said, some of those older shows like Dunbine, it's like they're just stretched out, and it's just like they're
what's always interesting, and this is an issue I have with like stuff even with like Sailor Moon, is the fact that there needs to be like a fight in every episode.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, I would prefer without like all the fighting constantly, but I understand why it's there commercially.
Have you ever heard of Fang of the Sun Dougram?
Is that a mecha show too?
Yes.
Yeah, I know the name. I think I can see the mecha in my mind. I say I'm not sitting in front of the internet right now, but yeah, I kind of I know
it's very
the show.
like clunky. It's very like grounded looking. It's like it doesn't have like a proper like head or face or anything.
Yeah,
that's kind of like the prototypical example of like what I would think of overlong, kind of drawn out kind of.
Oh, that's like
shows
because it's
from
like
that era.
70 some episodes.
74, I think.
75.
Some of those shows you had to be living in Japan at the time, watching it as it aired. It's some of them are long hauls.
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, you just had to be there while it was on TV.
Yeah, I think it would have been amazing back then.
We actually talked about this on like the last podcast, where it's like people kind of forget sometimes that these shows are airing on TV in Japan.
Yeah, and how that kind of like informs them.
Yeah, we have like such a culture here of like, because anime kind of came up with like streaming and Netflix and stuff. Like, there's such
and
a
being
culture
able to, like,
of just
binge watch it.
Right, yeah, like binge watching. Like, oh, I had to watch all of the first 72 episodes of My Hero Academia in 2 days or something like that. They forget that this is airing on a weekly basis in Japan. Like, you're not really supposed to sit there and like plow through the show.
It's kind of interesting too. It reminds me of an episode I did on my show, is that you had to sometimes, for some of these shows and some of these, and even video games from the past, argument can be used the same. Going back and watching some of these, you kind of have to clear your head, from the last 30 years of pop culture that came after the show. So
definitely, yeah.
And that's hard to do. But especially going back and playing an old game, somebody will be like, oh, this old game sucks. Yeah, but at the time, this old game wasn't an old game. It was brand new. You'd never seen anything like it. Same for anime. I mean, watching some of these animes back then were groundbreaking. And now, not so much. And it's, you have to have a bit of patience and remember the time period. And that's very hard to do. That's hard to do for any audience.
But at the same time, having that sort of benefit of like retrospect and hindsight means that you can look at something like Nausicaa, for example, and then, have like the context of everything that came after and everything that was influenced, like all the video games, all the anime and stuff. And you can look at it now and kind of like appreciate it on a level that wouldn't have been possible when it first came out.
Yeah, there's some you guys should do an entire episode on just the influence of some anime and what it did to pop culture. I mean,
so
many.
What was it? I was like, I was reading the other day, Michael B. Jordan is directing Creed 3, and he was talking about how it's been influenced by Naruto and Hajime no Ippo and all this stuff. And it's really interesting just to see how or you look at like The Matrix and Ghost in the Shell, or how James Cameron was originally planning on directing like an Alita adaptation, but then decided to do Avatar. All this like interesting stuff in terms of how anime has had a really big impact, especially on like big Hollywood films over the last 20 some years.
Definitely. Like I remember when Akira came out, that changed it all. Like I was this anime fan that was kind of nuts, but I finally had that was a loaded gun to say, look, you take this seriously now. And that's what that did at the time. That if anybody came over and said, oh, it's anime, I put in Akira, and they'd be like, oh my God, that motorcycle sequence. Nobody could say that wasn't incredible. I got the 4K Blu-ray. I was watching it maybe around 2 months ago, and I was like, God damn, this still holds up incredibly well.
You see, this is kind of weird saying this now, but then you see like Kanye West referencing that in his music videos and stuff, and it's like, wow, this is really taken off, and that's like almost 20 years ago at this point.
Yeah, we're at a point, as I said, I'm glad it's mainstream, because nobody can say that anime is not cool, because it's absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I think it's leading people to finally, recognize it and give it the respect that it's sort of always deserved internationally.
Well, I brought up that story of making my dad watch the first episode of Robotech, and his generation just didn't get it. I was part of the new generation that was looking at cartoons. My dad just saw a cartoon and said, nope, this is children's stuff. Where I saw, and I was like, I like cartoons, but I was getting sick of Bugs Bunny at like 11 years old. I was like, I need something more. So when I saw Galaxy Express and I saw Robotech and all this stuff, I was like, look at this. Like things are changing and all of that. And I'm so happy how far we've come now, that anime is accepted in this country, and it's completely looked at as being freaking cool by if anybody says anime's not cool, I'd like to see that. Oh, anime's not cool. You'd be uncool to say
Yeah,
that.
you have even like you're like a your stereotypical jocks now. Even they're like into anime. It's everywhere. It's no longer like a nerd thing or like a weird subculture. It's really come and permeated the mainstream in a lot of ways.
And I think that's what me and William were trying to do back then was promote it out of that cliche of being the nerdy hobby. That no, there's some really groundbreaking stuff here, and we were kind of that generation bringing it in. And now that it's ushered in, it's like it's up to you guys now to usher it into another generation that's going to come after you guys. I mean, that's what we've got to keep on trying to do. And because, I want people in 100 years to still be watching Gunbuster going, hey, that's fucking cool, that ending.
Yeah. Because it's like, anime is like getting in the mainstream now, but it's a lot of like the big mainstream stuff. So I think like the next step in our plan for global domination
exactly.
is, then start, getting, more like lesser known stuff that's really under the radar and seeing like that maybe come into the mainstream more, stuff like Gunbuster.
Yeah.
Or, it's just like, it's like the future envisioned in Otaku no Video where anime is just taken over the whole world.
And I think we see like the beginning of that a little bit. You got like Kenny's videos. His videos do like millions of views, and he's talking about Creamy Mommy and Miki Momo.
Yeah, just totally random, unheard of stuff.
Yeah, I remember I went to England and I came back when I was 21. William just opened his anime store. And I went there and I got a tape Otaku no Video, and that became my Bible of my life. And I was like, this is who I am.
Hell yeah.
This is me. This is me. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted, and I got so obsessive with anime back then, like so obsessive. I really still am a big fan now, but I was really obsessive. I was like kind of you guys right now, just like trying to find all the stuff and find as much as I can, all of the behind the scenes stuff and all that. So
yeah, just sort of like ravenously going through it. Yeah, just trying, always. It's like a drug almost. Trying to get that next fix.
Trying to find that hidden gem, to use that stereotypical thing. Or like, and when you find it, it's like so like cool. Like even in the early 2000s, like for me, like hidden gems were like finding Gasaraki. After I was watching like Cowboy Bebop, I was buying the DVDs of that. That's how you watched Cowboy Bebop back then. You went and bought DVDs. It was kind of crazy. And $40 for like 3 episodes.
I think we watched something maybe a year ago called a little independent short film made by the director of, what was it, C3 Boo Mumi?
Yeah, there was a Gainax anime. It was like one of the last shows.
One of the really late Gainax anime before the studio kind of really shit the bed. But it's just like this.
He was brought on as like a young talent and was the director. That was like his first directorial debut.
But we watched this short film he did called A Japanese Boy Who Draws, which is only like 20 some minutes. And we just sort of watched it just on a complete whim because we didn't want to watch a 2-hour long movie. And we just watched it, and it completely blew us away with like all the different styles it incorporates, stuff that looks like just a child's drawing, and just seeing that evolve into like an actual professional looking like manga anime art style. And seeing something like that and finding it was really satisfying because up until that point, no one had heard of it. It wasn't even on sites like My Anime List. It had like less than 1,000 views on YouTube.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so poignant. And then like when we finished it, we only had like 6 people in the call.
Yeah.
And like it was just dead silent. Like everyone was just kind of like soaking it in, like, wow.
Yeah,
what the hell?
Because we usually talk while watching shit, but sometimes something just really hits us and we're just all just completely enraptured by it and silent.
That's cool.
And it was so rewarding to like spread that around, and you can like directly see, like especially early on, you would directly see kind of like the numbers of like how many people had seen it were going up. And like that was directly because we were sharing it among that community. And then they were sharing it among their community, and so like
and posting it on other servers and seeing every one of the other servers and communities like lose their minds over it. It's really a cool thing to see.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's nice to find those little gems that are actually really cool, like 20 minutes long too. I mean, there's like Angel's Egg and stuff like that in the 80s. For finding those artsy types, kind of little creations that are really neat and all that. But yeah, it's nice to just kind of get away from all the mecha and all that, and just find these like little thought-provoking things. And I think that's what anime has always been about. It's about thought-provoking stuff, things that are like, that were science fiction, things that made you think outside of your own brain. And if that's what science fiction is, that's what science fiction is. Or, and the fantasy elements and all of that, and just stuff that you can get swept away in.
Yeah, even across the board into stuff like manga and video games. It's really
I think because we kind of talked about this, we actually recorded for a review here last week for a show that's about like delinquents, and we kind of touched on it there. I think what stands out for a lot of people about anime and like people who were getting into the industry back in like the 80s, late 70s, it's a very like fringe, like niche kind of like sphere originally anyway.
Originally,
and,
yes.
Yeah, like these people who didn't necessarily fit into like what was perceived to be the like standard of society kind of thing. And so like these people, like you see this kindred spiritness between, mecha and like isekai, where like they are imagining these worlds of like the future or like alternate possibilities that they can kind of escape to and find that kind of sense of belonging in these worlds. I think that's a large part of like why it resonates with like people here in the West, is like that emotional core of it.
That was like the otaku culture of back then, and you don't hear that word anymore. I think that's a word that nobody uses anymore. Like we honestly in the 90s would call ourselves otakus, you were into this stuff. You had to be so like obsessive into it, where now it's really an uncool terminology to use.
Yeah, I think it's more so just like anime fan or even just like weeb, ironically,
Yeah, there's this kind of prevailing idea of like anime is trash and so am I. Like this kind of just self-deprecating kind of like almost like gallows humor, I guess you could say, where it's just like they're putting themselves, even though anime is like more mainstream than ever and more accepted in like the general population spheres, you still have this like faction or like group of people who are putting themselves down, like putting up this front of like, oh yeah, we're losers, we don't really care.
It's like a self-deprecating insecurity kind of thing.
Well,
when it's
for sure.
You can like this shit and be cool. It doesn't need to be lame.
Well, like it's so funny for me. I remember going to Williams' store, and I could see that like times changing when Sailor Moon came on TV, and there was like Final Fantasy VII. I come out, Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time was a few years away, but still in that like 5-year period, where all of a sudden in his anime store, which you'd never seen before, girls would start coming in. And they wore cat ears. It was that stereotype in the 90s. And I remember, and these girls would come in and brag how many times they finished Final Fantasy VII. And you're like, it was so weird. I was like, I remember, guys, I'm so old, and Willem could tell you this too. A convention and like a comic, you'd go to a comic book convention in 1988 in Vancouver here. I remember walking in, and I'd see William or whatever walking around. And I remember seeing a guy who had a girl with him. And I'm like, I can't believe, how did he get that girl here? And I'm not sure, like comic book conventions used to be stinky, BO, male-infested areas. Like, you have no idea how great it is nowadays when that is almost predominantly women at times. But there was a time, But there was a time when I remember standing there with some friends of mine, which was Rod's brother and that. I remember I was buying like a Gundam poster in line. Like people would come sell Gundam posters for $10. Hey, you want a Gundam poster? I was buying it. And looking over and seeing this girl going, how did he get a girl to come to a comic book convention? And I remember getting into the convention and I had to do a double look. I'm like, she's just like walking around with him looking. So I could, like, it was alien.
You don't really get that sort of culture shock now with conventions because, you have such a diverse array of people, different genders, ages, in almost like equal proportion, it seems like when I go to a convention now, it's people from, in high school all the way up to like their 50s and 60s with seemingly not like bias towards either one. They're kind of like equally represented.
Hey, do you know, I remember watching Iczer 1 for the first time and going, I can't believe it's so cool that these girls have blue hair, red hair, pink hair, orange hair. It was so weird. Well, nowadays, everybody's freaking doing that stuff. But I mean, back then, you'd not seen that either. Anime, it was still doing such unique things. I remember, even in it, there was a character like called Big Gold. And,
yeah.
Yeah, total female-looking character. but talked with a guy's voice. And I was always like, the Japanese are so interesting. They're always doing such different takes on everything.
Yeah, I mean, even look at stuff like what Ranma 1/2 was doing with gender, or Stop Hibari-kun, really ahead of its time. There's like a trans rights scene in Dirty Pair.
Oh, is there? I don't remember anything.
I think
like
so.
that.
I think one of the episodes is like
he falls in love with like a woman, and then the father is just like really against like them being together, and like it's revealed in the climax where he's like, I don't want you to be with her because she used to be a male, and then like the Dirty Pair are just like, so that's like 60%.
What in 10 people have changed their sex these days?
Well, yeah, they were all part of the future back then, you know, like for sure. So it made sense it would be that progressive and all of that. So that's funny. I didn't actually know that for the
yeah. When we were watching, we were like, wow, okay, that's pretty forward thinking, especially for an anime in the 80s.
Right? Yeah. It's yeah. So now it's unreal. I mean, I can't believe I lived in a time when I saw one girl in a convention, and it was. And as I told you, I go around this comic book convention, and there'd be a little table set up for the Victoria Animation Club. This is even before William took over. And they just have a couple of books and things. And there'd be a couple of guys sitting there just to talk to you about can I tell you about the religion of anime? And they would have a little newsletter. And then you could spend, I think it wasn't even expensive, like $5 a year, and you could get the newsletter sent to you. And then they're like, oh, hey guys, we're playing Bubblegum Crisis in the back room over here. And I'm like, what's that? I'm like, what's Bubblegum Crisis? And then go into the back room and being like, oh my God, another life-changing moment right there. And so it's as I say, I'm very happy that I grew up in the time I did. It was like this magical era. You go in this dirty back room and watch some great anime and then all of that. Yeah. And there'd be 3 people in the back. There'd be nobody there. As the movie or whatever would progress, more people would stick their heads in and come in. And I remember one guy standing next to the television. He was part of the animation club, and he'd be telling you the story because there was no subtitles of what was going on. So we were watching Fist of the North Star. And he's like, oh, this is, Hakuto no Ken, or, and this is Fist of the North Star, and he has all these pressure points he can do, and he's talking next to the television. And we were so
just kind of like explaining it as almost like a weird silent movie, even though it's not silent.
Dude, it was so wild to think back. He wasn't annoying. We were thankful to have him.
I had that same kind of experience when I went, because we went and watched a couple movies while I was in Japan. We actually watched Your Name, Kimi no Nawa movie.
Yeah, I've heard that.
That big one that was in Japan. I was there opening weekend. We actually didn't go on opening weekend, even though I wanted to go. But opening weekend, I could have been there. And then when I left, my girlfriend at the time was like, man, we should have went and watched that movie. That's like the biggest movie now. So I went back a year later, and it was still in theaters.
Wow.
And when we went and watched it, like, she's having to because I don't speak Japanese, I could pick up a little bit just because anime is so kind of like, Japanese in general is just kind of a very scripted language. And like anime uses a very limited kind of vocabulary that you wouldn't necessarily use while you're walking on the street necessarily. So I'm able to pick up some context, but she's sitting there having to like whisper in my ear in the movie theater, like, okay, he's saying this, and this is the rough idea of what they're saying here. Like, so I definitely get when you want to watch something and you don't have people translating it for you or like a dub or anything like that. Like, I definitely get the means, like the extent of like where you'll go just to see this movie.
Or even like, cause like when I read like some of these old like Usenet posts, I'll see people talking about like, they're asking for like the script, for someone to send them just the script for Patlabor 2. I guess it just because they have it raw and they can just read the script along with the movie as they're watching it.
Oh, yeah.
Just holding the script and then reading it.
Well, I got fanzines that I would get from the Victoria Club and from Willem's Club that people would tell you the story. And so you'd take it with you. And yeah, they would translate it. There'd be sometimes little small mini scripts in there in your newsletter to understand the anime better. Or the people explaining what the anime was. So they're like, yeah, we have this in the club's library. So this is what kind of the story is about. It's kind of linked to this. And so, yeah, I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, you really had to memorize a lot of stuff. You couldn't just leave it all online. You had to talk with people and to understand what was going on. For me to understand the story of Megazone, I had the books first before anything. I got the books in 87, the mini books. And so I kind of understood the story. And then I got a fanzine that I bought in a comic book store that explained the story. And I can't tell you how extraordinary it was to find out about Bahamut and what was really going on. And yeah, it was really so fascinating. And so you're kind of reading this like sci-fi book, and then you can accompany it with the anime itself. And it's like, this is incredible. I mean,
it's like what we were talking about earlier with like Iczer 1 and piecing the story together with the art books.
Right, yeah. That's how I did it. And even William did it back then. And he had a translator that would translate the manga as William flipped the pages, and he'd be like, "Oh, this is what he's saying here. Haha, isn't that so funny?" And he was like kind of very infectious about it. We were all very infectious about it. I think because it was such a mystery, most of it. And I think that's what made it more alluring. That it's like, we want to know everything about this like hidden wonder from Japan type of thing. So yeah, very, very cool times.
I mean, nowadays you don't really have to do that because it's so accessible and stuff is so much stuff has been translated now, and it's continuing to be translated by like groups like Orphan, Kinoko Video, all these groups that you don't really have to rely on that anymore because it's so mainstream now. So many people are into it that you can have just a bunch of people constantly translating things and getting you new stuff to watch.
It's even opened like just the general kind of anime spheres like horizons up quite a bit. I remember William was saying that back in the day you wouldn't have picked up something like Majo Demo Steady to like rip or translate anything like that because you had something like Starship Troopers that everyone wanted to watch and was kind of the big thing at the time. So you were very limited as far as like resources and like what people were interested in.
What was in demand.
Yeah, so you couldn't really, unless you were somebody who could visit Japan or like gain access to like, Laserdisc or something like that from Japan and you knew Japanese, you couldn't necessarily branch out as much as you can now to kind of like find your own sense of like taste and perspective in anime.
Right, yeah. You had to, that would come later into the 90s. After a lot of the main shows got subtitled, he'd do the niche shows, and you get a little bit of that. But yeah, he'd spend a lot of time doing the latest Pat Labor movies, stuff like that. Those are the big things. I'm like, have you guys finished the Pat Labor movies? Like, oh, we're working on it. That's kind of what it was back then. And you're like, okay, and then you check back a week later, and then they'd be done and stuff like. And sometimes I drop up tapes for William, and I come back 2 weeks later, and he's like, oh, sorry, I haven't gotten around to doing your tapes yet. I'm like, dude, I just drove 40 minutes to get here. Like, that's what it was like back then. And then sometimes, you go in and he'd have it done in a day. What a service. I go in, drop tapes off, come back 2 weeks later, have all this anime. And I built up, I got like 300, 400 tapes. I still have them all in my closet in totes because I just don't want to get rid of them for the emotion of it all. Because it's, I've replaced a lot of it with Blu-rays and stuff over the years, but
I think it's important to like keep in perspective. People are still doing that kind of stuff today. Like it is very removed. Like you're not getting a tape, you're not sending something in, and they're not giving you like physical things. But you still have people who like. There was a really popular anime like back in the 2010s, Madoka Magica. There were people who went and like found like the best kind of encoded release on Blu-ray, so that they can release the best product possible for everybody who liked that show. And there are people who are still going out and translating it as it's airing on TV and having it out within like a day.
Oh, I know. It's crazy.
Like, it is a thankless job. Like people aren't like sitting there like somebody who's watching a torrented like Kiss Anime stream website version of whatever you just translated isn't going to know that you were the one that did it. But they're still going out there and doing that. So that's very much still alive. It's kind of tapered a little bit because you have like Crunchyroll and stuff now that are doing like subs as they're kind of airing the show. But yeah, like it's definitely like still alive in some capacity.
There's all these people behind the scenes doing God's work. And I'm telling you, what a time. You just go on the internet and press download. Oh, what do you mean my anime's not out today? It was out in Japan yesterday. People are like so entitled now.
Oh God, yeah.
It's incredible. It's insane. I think it's funny. But I remember, I think when you even had William on, because I feel the same, back in the day, you had to invest in your hobby. I had to buy the books. I had to spend like a lot of money on books. I had to spend a lot of money on getting laser discs or something. You had to pay for this stuff. Now you just go, click download. And I think some of the magic is gone that way because when you invest your own money into your hobby, you feel like, I think it's like anybody who plays Warhammer. You're paying your own money to be in that hobby, so you're getting something out of it one way or the other. And I think some of the magic is lost. You just watch something, you're like, oh, so I think that's something. Do you think anime is more disposable now? Oh, I watched the show, I'm done. I don't care. I don't like, there's less caring.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, I would say that there's pros and cons to it though, because since there's such like, you don't have to put so much of an investment to it, you kind of get more of an opportunity to try new things. Not necessarily people are taking advantage of that, which we kind of would hope people would.
Yeah.
But you do get, like, because it's such a low investment, you don't have to like spend hundreds of dollars to like get into My Hero Academia like you would have had to, 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
So you're able to try that out, and then like you're able to try something because you're just in the sphere kind of around it. You're able to try something completely off the wall that you might not have ever even given a second look if it was you had to pay money for it.
Right.
Yeah, there I think there are a lot of like pros and cons like that where, in some ways it might be worse, but in other ways it's also substantially better than it was in the past.
Oh, definitely. Let me say, like, I'm 49 years old, but I'm saying today is much better than the past in that regard. I mean, the amount of anime you have access to is on Blu-ray. I mean, we're spoiled. I mean, everybody's spoiled.
Yeah, just at like your fingertips, just like, a single Google search away.
If you're a younger person growing up and you're like interested in a show, the world is in front of you almost too much. It's almost overwhelming. Like for you guys.
Yeah, to the point that it paralyzes you and you're like, I have no idea what to fucking watch.
Yeah, like look at you guys, or I would say, it's going to sound funny, but you're kind of experts in your field, but there's still stuff that you haven't even seen. And me, I'm a kind of an expert in my field from my time, and there's stuff that I haven't even seen. So I don't even, now if my daughter gets into anime, when she gets older, she's going to be like, where the F do I start, man? Where do I start?
I mean, you get like 200, 250 anime airing every season. So at the end of the year, you're well around 1,000 anime a year.
Yeah.
That's too much almost. But I'm not saying it's too much, but I'm like, that's a lot. I mean, for sure. I mean, it must be me. But in the 80s and 90s...
I don't know if it's that high, Mumi, but yeah, I think it's...
Oh, no, sorry. It's 200, 250 a year. It's 50 a season.
Yeah,
sorry, I had the
hold
number
on, wait
right,
a second.
I put it in the wrong.
We watched almost every show this season, at least like the first episode. We didn't watch that many shows, Mumi.
Still, that is quite significant, and it's only going to keep going higher as like production becomes easier and easier.
So wait, so hold on a second. You guys watch every brand new show that comes out?
Not every. So there was
season.
A point in time I was able to like actually try every single show that aired.
You at least watch like the first episode.
Now that I have like a full-time job, I'm working like 55, 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I don't have the time to do that, but we do make a concerted effort to like watch. Probably
we'll at least like go
least.
through and like check out, and then we'll see like, okay, well, these things we might be interested in, and we'll watch the first episode, and then however many of those we feel like continuing, we'll continue. I think this season we're watching 7 or 8 shows that are airing right now.
Yeah.
Trying to watch, I should say. We're pretty far behind.
And like, if you have the time, I definitely think it's the way to kind of go about it. Because like, there are so many shows that I've watched in the last like 10 years or so that if I hadn't tried it, I probably wouldn't have kept up with it.
Yeah.
And like, there are shows that are like really special to me now that I wouldn't have watched if I had just gone with like what was kind of being filtered to me through like general discourse and what was being kind of recommended as like
and it's one of those things where it's like I feel like if I don't watch it while it's airing, I'll probably never go back to it. So I might as well live in the moment and do it now. And enjoy it while I can.
I'm going to ask you guys then for some anime recommendations for me. So I'm an old school guy and all that. I like mecha stuff, and I like heavy military style mecha stuff. I guess I don't even know why I'm saying that, but that's kind of like, I'm thinking like Gasaraki right now. It's stuck in my head. But what's kind of a really good, smart, science fiction-y kind of mecha show that's kind of thought-provokingly cool. But it's cool with some good mecha action.
I think the obvious one that comes to mind first would be like Cyberpunk Edge Runners.
Okay.
Because that is so influenced by obviously it's the cyberpunk universe. That's what influenced so many of the 80s OVAs. But it does very much have like that same kind of spirit to it. It's directed by Imaishi, who I don't know if you know the anime Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann.
Oh yeah, I know that show. Yeah.
He's the same director who directed that. So it has very much like that kind of Gainax spirit, a little like kind of underneath the surface. It's not as prevalent because it is a cyberpunk work, so it is very downer.
No, that's cool. I know, I like that. So sorry, it's called Cyberpunk. What's the rest of it?
Edge Runners.
I'm writing it down. Anything else?
It's not a TV show, but it's a movie. It's called it's also not mecha, but it is like a hard sci-fi, almost like a Tom Clancy-esque like political thriller called Genocidal Organ, which I think is really interesting. Oh, Akudama Drive. Akudama Drive, I think, kind of taps into that like 80s like violent, edgy, like cyberpunk setting.
There really is not a lot of like sci-fi airing.
Yeah, that's my favorite stuff. I mean, there's always these teen dramas, like there's always that going on.
Yeah, but in terms of like hard sci-fi, you don't get as much of that nowadays.
I mean, yeah, like to be honest with you, it all reflects the time period, right? So
yeah,
the 80s
certainly
was reflective of all that kinds of time. So yeah, it makes sense. But my God, I mean, the high school dramas are still continuing. They'll never stop doing those.
Gridman was a pretty cool. I have not seen it myself, but I've been told Gridman is a really cool.
Gridman.
DDD Gridman, is that what it was?
SSS, like SSS. 4 S's dot Gridman.
So if you're familiar with like the tokusatsu kind of stuff, like Super Sentai, Power Rangers. Yeah, Gridman was one of those shows, and this is like a reboot of that. It's made by the same studio who did Edge Runners, so there's probably...
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to Cyberpunk Edge Runners. That sounds really interesting. I mean, and then this movie, Genocidal Organ. Who's it? Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And I guess just one last one from me is this one's not like, I don't know, super new. This is 2003. Maybe you've seen it. It's called Planetes.
Yes, wasn't it they're like I remember
the garbage men in space.
That's right. I have seen that.
Okay, yeah, that's like my favorite anime of all time.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool one. The animation was really good on that.
Yeah, and I just like a lot of the concept and like political themes.
Yeah. I like anime like that. So you kind of that's what I really like.
Oh, you might like an anime called Flag. It's from 2008. It's directed by the guy. Is it directed by the guy who did Vatomes?
Hey, I was totally shocked. Like, because I grew up in the 80s and I'd never talked to anybody about it. I always thought it was Votoms. But everybody says it's Votom. No, I'd say Votoms. But isn't it like, how do you pronounce it? It's Votoms?
Bottoms, probably.
Yeah, it is Bottoms because
I've always heard it as Votoms as well. So it's just like, wait, what?
Do you know why?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really pay much attention. So like, I always think of that with like The Legend of Zelda. Mm-hmm. With Ocarina of Time, everyone calls like the village Kakariko Village, which if you were pronouncing it, if it were Japanese, it'd be like the Kakariko Village.
Right.
So I never like pay much attention. It's like however you want to pronounce it, whatever.
Well, hey, I mean, we grew up
especially with like the nonsense like mecha names a lot of the time.
Yeah, I know. But I watched a review and it's like Bottoms or something. I'm like, Bottoms, like that sounds so weird.
Vatum.
But yeah, it was all Votoms, or I don't even know what I was calling it, but I wasn't calling it that. And I remember thinking, I really don't like that title, and I always like the title.
that sounds less cool.
Sounds less cool. I know. And I watched some guys reviewing that. It turned me off the entire anime. I was just like, oh god, it's terrible.
But yeah, I think if you like War in the Pocket, I think you'll really appreciate Flag because it's kind of
I love War in
its
the
presentation is very much like guerrilla kind of reporter warfare presentation.
Oh, that's cool.
It was very experimental, like where it was like first person has like camcorder kind of look and is following like a very kind of grounded, military conflict. I would say it's not so much like a Gundam or Batomes or Bottoms, whatever.
Yeah,
where it's like giant mechs like flying in space. It's more like Patlabor.
That's great. I love Patlabor. I adore that show. Okay, guys, you give me something to definitely go away with here. I can go and catch up on some animes I've missed and some that sound definitely interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really cool.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
I did want to touch on kind of the community aspect because like I always joke that there's like a alternate reality where like I started making video game reviews back in like 2012.
Right.
Because like around that time is when I would have started doing it, but I didn't like get into any kind of video production. But like getting into the anime like production sphere, it's felt surprisingly kind of like connected in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily guessed. Where like, we're in contact with dozens of other anime content creators just like behind the scenes and we all kind of like share ideas and stuff. How prominent is that? Because like, I mean, obviously you had like the All Gen Gamers podcast. That's actually how I found you was through like Pete's channel.
Right.
And like his game room tours and stuff. And then through All Gen Gamers and then found your channel through him and that.
Right.
How connected would you say that like the gaming, or if you even know really, is the gaming like production sphere like now? Because like it seems like it's gotten like so massive compared to like the anime sphere, that it doesn't seem like there might not be like that sense of community behind the scenes like there is.
No,
with
there's,
anime.
there's not. So yeah, like back in the day when we kind of started on YouTube, anybody who was talking about video games we connected to, and there became a big community of people who watch the shows, people who just like video games and all of that. And we just liked hanging out, like talking about that kinds of stuff. And then as things progressed and all of that, everybody kind of went into their own sphere. And to be honest with you, I just I think because I am older now, I think that's also it. I got a family, I got a daughter and stuff like that. I really concentrate my time on certain things. So I don't talk to any, like I've been trying to talk to Pete Dorr for the last 6 months. We keep saying, hey, yeah, let's talk and all of that. And we, whenever we can do that, but there's not a huge sense of it anymore. And I think the reason why is because that opening sense of real community, of real hardcore fans has dissipated to so many other people coming in. And I'm not saying this, but even corporations have come in. Like and are tapping into the YouTube sphere of video games. I'm just talking about video games. And it's almost like they're coming with production values and money and sponsorships and all that. And that, I think, has changed the entire YouTube atmosphere. And I just try to stay true to myself and do my own thing in my lane. But I didn't even realize it changed. I kind of looked back one day and everything had changed. And everybody, all the creators really stick to themselves. And I know a lot of them are part of certain communities together and all that. I kind of just do my own thing, not because I dislike anybody or anything like that. Because I got to manage my time. To go and talk to people now, nearly turning 50, I don't just casually go and blabber for hours on end. There has to be a reason for it and all of that now because of timing and all that. But I don't know if that's changed for you in the anime scene. It sounds like everybody's really well connected. I'll say this much: I'm on Twitter. And sometimes I get a recommendation of somebody talking about Macross. And I sit and read their posts and I'm like, I'm following this person. And do you know what I do? Yeah. What I do, because I don't talk to anybody about anime anymore, I'm almost like this feverish nut job who wants to talk about anime. But I've got nobody to talk to anime about. So I'll DM that person, because then maybe they're like sometimes following me. I'm like, dude, I love it that you like Macross, and oh my God, I'm a big fan. And I'm going on. Because I don't talk to anybody. But I noticed one thing by doing that, by following a bunch of people, it's a very small world.
It can,
a little bit.
Especially because anime production is kind of split into like different spheres. We kind of do a little of everything, right? Like we watch stuff that's airing, we watch like older stuff and make a concerted effort to like try to talk about both equally. That's kind of uncommon with a lot of channels. A lot of channels either focus completely on older stuff or they focus completely on what's relevant and airing right now.
Right.
There's not really a huge effort to like combine the two. I do think it was interesting you mentioned the corporations thing because we do kind of get that. We're starting to see that with the anime production.
Sure.
The big channels that you might know. Oh, you might not know because this.
I don't watch I do not subscribe to any anime big channels. Not that I'm against them, but I stay in the video game world.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. Like, those big names in the anime production sphere, like they have become kind of segregated, but they have also been kind of, they like the big podcast in anime sphere is Trash Taste Podcast now. And that is produced by a Japanese publishing company. And so there's been some drama as far as like when they talk about some shows, because it's like, hey, the show that you're talking about saying it's a good show is produced by the company that signs your checks kind of thing. So we are getting a little bit of that in our sphere.
Yeah, whenever there's money that comes in and sponsorships, that changes. And I'll tell you this much, for me, I am very, very conscious about doing my own show my own way and not being influenced by money. Or, do you know, I won't even tell you, but on Christmas time, I was offered $10,000 to do certain kinds of sponsorships, turn them all down. And hey, could I use that money? Sure. I'd love that money. But I knew it would change the authenticity of my show. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And hey, listen, if you guys ever want to do that, I'm not saying, but for me, you can't buy authenticity. That's the one thing you can't buy. And so a lot of these shows, some of these guys start off as fans, and then all of a sudden, they have a huge audience, they start burning out because how could they not? Especially when you have a big audience, there has to be a level of perfection there for that audience, so they're not going to be happy. And at that point, they start getting other editors. Then they got money coming in. Then they get sponsorships. And then the show, I'm not saying it, I'm not picking on anybody. I don't know anybody who's doing this, but it can change you. And I've seen it happen to YouTubers in the gaming spectrum and all of that. And that's the one thing that I don't want to change being a fan. Like I come in today to talk to you guys. You can tell I'm just a fan. You know what I mean? This is like my passion. And I don't want my passion to be changed by, say a company comes in saying, oh, how could you talk that about this game when we paid you thousands of dollars? I'm not ever in that position. So I can, when I talk greatly about a game, it's usually because I really love it. And there's a passion there, and I don't want to ruin that passion. And I think the passion can get ruined sometimes with money in there. Doing a sponsorship once in a while, no big deal. But if you have a mega corporation show with production value, I mean, you become the product of that show. Unfortunately.
I feel like we feel very kind of similarly to you. Neither of us really feel like money is that important. Like it's more about just like getting a conversation. Like we're very passionate about talking about this.
I know, yeah.
And so we want to get like that conversation out there. And like personally, me being in the sphere as long as I have, I felt so much like frustration trying to like just go into smaller communities and like steer the conversation that way. Because you're like, hey, you should watch this show. And they're all kind of still watching, you know, what's popular, and you don't really have anyone to talk about it with. And so this is more of like a productive way for me, I guess, to kind of like be that change that you want to see and push the conversation, even if it's just a little bit, right? Like push that conversation to something more productive or like something that you want to see to change to.
Great example of what you're saying is what you just did for me 10 minutes ago, where I asked you for recommendations. I'm actually going to go watch those recommendations. And I listen to me. I don't know any anime channel on there, on YouTube or anything. I couldn't go into YouTube and watch any new person on there telling me to watch some anime because I don't know who they are. I don't know if I really buy them and all that. Where with you guys, the one thing, your authenticity again is so real and from a really good place of being a fan that I absolutely buy all what you're recommending to me, as will other people. People will listen to this and listen to you guys go, these are the guys that I should be listening to because I believe them. I know them as people. I like them as people. They're just fans like me. I want to be recommended by a fan to a fan.
Well, we're definitely trying to.
Yeah, and that's even with
we're on that grind.
Even with my own show. That's why I've never changed my background in 15 years of the show because I want it to be grounded into how it started and me being the fan then and me being the fan now. And I didn't ever want that to change. And that's the one thing I can go to bed on a night and I sleep very well, knowing that I have a passion for whatever it is I'm doing, if it's on YouTube or what. And it's not influenced or changed by any outside things. And I think that's why my audience comes in and watches me, because they know I'm not just making this stuff up or these are real, this is who you are. And that's I think the trick to YouTube and to do anything podcast or anything, they want the real people. They want the real, so give them the real person. Don't give them the changed person over time who becomes influenced and if you are burnt out, go burn out and then come back type of thing and all that. I feel sorry for a lot of these channels. They get big and then they have to stay big.
Yeah.
That's hard.
I will say it was a surreal experience because, like, you know, I'm not gonna like blow smoke up your ass or anything, right? Like, I've been subscribed to you for 12 years.
Well, thank you.
Watch your stuff like on and off because
sure, of course.
I'm not playing games consistently. You'll have a video that pops up in my feed. I'm like, oh, it looks interesting. Like your the Yoshiteru Sujino one, like that popped up in my feed.
Insane, eh?
Yeah, like that was a really interesting video to me. Like. But, you know, I don't watch every episode. I watch on occasion.
Of course, I don't expect anybody to.
You've kind of been like this personality in my peripheral for 12 years now almost.
Right.
And so, like, when you messaged me, it was such like a surreal moment because, like, I told the story to Sai. Like, I was at work. I was about to go on my lunch break. I had my phone. And I see, like, someone followed you on Twitter, which I have a very small Twitter. I'm not like really good at Twitter.
It was very hard to track you down, by the way.
So like I see I get followed and I just see like the name briefly. It didn't like register. I'm like, oh, okay, who's this? I click on it and then like your profile picture comes up and it's like your channel profile. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's interesting. Which I do.
Yeah, what does he want? A date? Like, what's this guy? Like, yeah, exactly.
Well, I knew you knew William because I think I actually found him through your videos.
Oh, interesting.
Initially,
yeah.
But I mean, it never like occurred to me that you might watch what we made, like with him or with him making a video about us or whatever.
As you say, it's a very small community. And so I saw like William talk. He made an episode talking that he was mentioned on your podcast. So I went and watched it and I listened to the whole thing and I'm like, I really like these guys. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I would love to talk to, some anime with them. But I know you don't understand this. You think like from my point of view, because I'm very grounded, then I'm like, oh, these guys are like pretty cool guys. I mean, I don't really, want to bug them to be on their show. That's so like pretentious of me. So, but I was like, man, I really need to talk about anime. So like, maybe I'll just say, hey, if you're looking for, I even think the way I worded it with you was like, hey, if you're ever like looking for somebody in the future or somebody, like I kind of would like to do that. And I'm so thankful that you guys got it. If you guys got William Chow on, I was like, you guys get it. I mean, you really are hardcore fans of anime. I mean, that's just, and so I became a fan of you guys. And so that's why. So, well, thank you for your compliment and thanks for watching the show and all that. But I'm telling you, I think even to do with my show, to do with your show, to do with Will, the core thing is none of us are corporate. We're all fans. And I think, and I think we're just fans talking to fans about fandom. And I think that's what's cool about it. That's how I discovered you, through the grapevine of fandom and all of that. Yeah. And I listen to you guys and I'm like, these guys know their shit too. Like these guys are so knowledgeable and new stuff that I have something to learn here too. So that's what I really enjoyed, especially when you guys had William on and Kenny on beforehand. I was just like, these are really good podcasts. I listened to the whole thing. Like it was just in one sitting. It was like really, really good stuff. So really interesting.
Like, yeah. We definitely, like, right now we're having a lot of people in the anime sphere on, like, our friend Joe, Posit Select, and then Kenny, obviously. But, yeah, we would love, like, my vision for, like, what I would love to do in the future, like, whenever we have, like, more means to do it, whether it be time or whatever, get, like, able to find somebody to kind of edit the audio for us or something.
Right.
I'd love to be able to, like, talk to other, like, not necessarily, like, not only, like, anime creators, like, people who watch anime in other spheres, because, like, I've always really valued like the perspectives of other people and like especially people who don't necessarily have my perspective because like obviously in the anime sphere we have different perspectives from each other but we're still coming at anime a certain way whereas like talking to you or talking to any other kind of content creator that's not necessarily focusing on anime, you get like a different perspective than you would talking to somebody who got into anime and is doing like video essays or something. And then like I would love to do that as well as platform like other smaller channels, that we can have on and like have those conversations too.
Do you know, like you guys have to understand this too. You'll find this fascinating. As much as I know, my level of anime stuff and all that, in listening to you guys, it was almost kind of intimidating. And I think this is just in general for somebody who's into anime and they want to come on an anime podcast. It's intimidating because the world of anime coverage that like you guys are doing and these shows are doing on YouTube, it's kind of like scary because it's intimidating because you're like, these guys know so much about so many unique things. Will I just go on the show and not know what they're talking about because they're using all the latest terminologies and things like that, terminologies that I don't know. Because you guys have used a few terminologies that I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I'll go with it. A lot of them I do know though too. And it's fascinating from my point of view that it is kind of nervy coming in and talking on, especially with younger guys, because younger guys are in tune with what's going on now. So it's like, oh, am I the hip, cool old guy? Do I know enough? Am I going to be out of my depth? And there was that kind of thought process for me, like going in to kind of like saying to coming in for you guys. That's why I was kind of like, oh man, like it's kind of nervy for me to say, hey, do you mind if I come in and talk to you about anime? That was all the behind the scenes stuff. So, but yeah, you guys are doing a great job. I mean, it's like it's great stuff. I'm looking forward to all the future ones as well.
Appreciate,
yeah. If we ever do make money, it's probably not going to go to us. It's just going to go to
don't, or else.